Welcome back to MVM. Today we have a review that you've probably been waiting for. I know we have. It's Azul Stained Glass of Sintra. This is the follow-up to last year's critical and commercial success, Azul. It just came back from Essen, and we've had a chance to play it a few times now.
It is a 2 to 4 player abstract game from Michael Kiesling. If you are already familiar with Azul, you're going to have familiarity with how to play this game already. What you're doing in this game is you're using your glazier to actually build the stained glass of Sintra. Each of us is going to have a player board at the bottom. This player board has an A and a B side, which is going to dictate how you're going to score your end of the game points. And each of us is also going to have 8 columns that are placed on a very specific side, because one of the sides has some random tiles that have kind of a wild where you can place anything on them. And again, these are going to be randomly placed. Now, to start the game, you're going to place an X number of factories in the center of the board. The number of factories depend upon the number of players. We have a 4-player game set up, so we have 9 factories set up. You're also going to place the first player marker in the center. That's because whoever drafts from the center first is going to be the first player, but they're going to break some glass in order to do that. So what are you trying to do? You're trying to collect tiles to place on your stained glass. This is a very cool game. It's called a pool building type of game because when you take from these tiles, you're taking all of one color, either from the factory or from the center of the shared pool. All right, so let's talk about how to actually play the game.
Yeah, like Jeremy said from the very beginning, if you've played Azul, the original, you're very familiar with that mechanic. On your turn, you can do one of 2 things in this game. The first thing you're going to do is very familiar to you, and that is going to be taking some of these tiles and putting them on one of your pattern strips. When you do that, like we said, you're going to take all of one color from one of these factories or from the center if there are some there. So for instance, I might take these 3 red ones. This remaining blue one is going to go to the center, and then I can place those on my stained glass window. Now here's the rub. You're going to have to place them either under your glazier or to any pattern strip to his right. So throughout the game he's going to be moving. So I'll show you. He's above these. I can place these right here on this strip, and he stays put. Now if I'd place them here, he would move 1 space over. On following turns, I'm going to have to place here or to the right. I can't place in that first strip. So that's what you're going to be doing as you take tiles until such time as you potentially score one of those things. And we'll talk about that in a second, but the other thing you can do is actually just move your glazier.
Yeah, so there's no limit to how far to the right your glazier can move. If he wanted to, he could have taken from a different tile and moved them all the way to the farthest right available strip if he so choose. However, the rub there is the next thing he takes has to go underneath him, or he has to skip in a complete turn of taking tile to move his glazier all the way to the furthest left. Anytime that you take tiles, you're going to place them on that strip. You can also take from the center, as you just said. This is one of the cool things about the game is when you take from the center, again, you're taking all of one color. So I could take this blue and place it right here, and I get the first player marker. This is good and bad because it gives you the first chance to pick from a tile pattern in a future round. However, it's going to break glass. You're going to see the strip over here on the point scoring board. The more glass that you break, the more points you get deducted from your overall score at the end of the game. Now let's talk about what happens when you complete one of your strips. This is what you're trying to do within the game. Once you complete a strip, meaning that you have all 5 of the different stained glass tiles on that strip, the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to score points according to whatever round you're in. This is the first of 6 rounds. At the start of the game, we're going to have 1 tile from each of the 5 different colors plus 1 random tile pulled from the bag. In this case, this is the first round of the game, so blue tiles are going to score. So however many blue tiles I pull off of the board is how many points I'm going to score, 1-to-1 ratio. So if I pulled 1 off, I score 1 point. If I pull 5 off, I score 5 points. You're also going to score for 2 other things: the column that you finish and any column to the right.
Yeah, if you look at the bottom of each of these columns on your scoring board, there's going to be points ranging from 4, 3, 2, 1, and then back to 2 at the very end. You're going to score those points in addition to the points that Jeremy just mentioned, plus, and this is what's the interesting part, any other points of that kind from that column over to the right. So for instance, if I've finished a window over here, I'm going to score those points again. And you don't have to complete a window. Each of these windows can be scored twice, and then they're removed from the game. As long as you've scored one once, it's going to score again if you've scored a window to its left.
Yeah. So when you look at your tile, say I completed the column that is above here, but I've also completed once down to here. I would get the 4 points here and then the 2 points here because I've completed this column once. So this is the great thing. You want to complete windows further to the right because you're going to be getting reoccurring points every time you complete something to the left, but your points on the left are going to score more than the ones on your right.
Yeah, those two things, those dynamics exist kind of contrasting with one another. You could score, like Jeremy just said, to the right and get those points recurring throughout the game, or you could look over here and really try to let that guide you in terms of wanting to score a bunch of the bonus points depending on what round it is.
Anytime you complete a column, the first time that you do so, you're going to place the tile on the top portion. The second time, you're going to place the second tile on the bottom portion. What the top ones say is simply take that column and now flip it over to its back side. Now you have a new window that you have to complete. Once you've completed it a second time, it's saying you have to actually physically remove that column from the game. You can't complete it again, which is going to affect how your glacier is going to move all the way to the furthest left area.
And you're going to continue doing that round after round. Round is going to end, obviously, once all of the tiles from all the factories in the center are taken. Once that's done, you're going to refill all of the factories, begin again with the new first player, and do that for 6 rounds, each time taking the round tile and putting it into the broken glass box, if you will. This is actually going to refill the bag at whatever point the bag runs empty.
And just like Azul, anytime you take tiles and you can't physically place them on your board because you don't have spaces or you don't have the right color combination, those pieces are going to break. It's broken glass at that point. Every tile that you can't place on your board is going to move this marker down 1 space. These are all into the game, negative victory points for you. And if you hit negative 18, guess what? You score negative 18 points right then, and then you're going to go right back up the top and start scoring more negative points at the end of the game. Every piece of broken glass is going to go in here along with any of your completed columns that you have. You're going to do that for 6 rounds. End of the game victory points. There's 2 ways to score, actually 3 ways to score victory points. One, how many victory points you've scored through the game. You're going to add those. Then you're going to remove any victory points from your broken glass. And then depending upon which side of the board you're playing with, you're going to earn victory points according to patterns of collected columns that you have.
Yeah, I'll take about the A side. The A side has these little columns here that have ornaments on them. On this side, you're going to want to try to surround each of those ornaments, and depending on how many tiles you've used to surround it, you're going to score different points. If you used 4 and you've completely surrounded it, you're going to get 10 points. If you used 3, you're going to get 6 points. 2, 3 points, and 0 to 1 gets you no points.
The B side is a little bit different. You're going to be looking at however many columns that you have both of the areas finished. That means you want to have a tile here and a tile here. You're going to multiply that by your best color. So if I have 4 orange somewhere on my board and 2 columns complete, that's 4 times 2. That's 8 victory points at the end of the game.
Yeah, that makes it really interesting because it adds a little bit more of a decision there because it depends on what colors you're bringing down to that scoring board when you complete a pattern tile.
All right, so that is Azul Stained Glass of Sintra. Let's talk about the review.
Absolutely.
I'll go first. I'll talk about my positives. Just like Azul previously, the components in this game are fantastic. This is a game that can be introduced to family members and enthusiast gamers, and it looks beautiful. Like, I can't imagine putting this in front of people, even my parents, and saying, all right, look at this. And they'd be like, oh, okay, there's no text, there's nothing to read. It's just an abstract game. It's very pretty to look at. And this continues that from the original Azul title.
Yeah, I think it falls right into that same category in terms of, in that respect. I don't think this is any more complicated. It may look more complicated. There's more moving pieces, literally, but it's really, in some respects, a little simpler in terms of what you're doing with these tiles, because in the original Azul, the scoring, I always felt I had to explain scoring a couple times to new players because it is a little weird in terms of how you score those tiles. In this one, it's pretty straightforward.
They're right here, and the multipliers right there.
Exactly. Yeah. There's just numbers on the board, and you add those up. So that's pretty straightforward. A great family game.
I'll also say, being that it's an Azul title, for people that have played the original Azul, this is a positive because you can just basically jump right in. Half of the game, or a majority of the game, is exactly the same as the original Azul, which can be good or bad.
Yeah, how you're taking your tiles, the mechanics of the game are identical.
Yeah.
It's literally a difference in what you're doing with those tiles. And that's what happens in front of the player. One more pro I'm going to add to this has to do with the components, and not so much the quality, although the quality of the components is there for sure. But some of the things they did here, I think, evidence them listening to users of the original Azul. I like the fact that there's a scoring board all by itself. I don't know if this was a large complaint, but in the original Azul, I can't tell you the number of times where people bumped their player board and bumped that scoring tile.
Yeah.
This one brings it all here. It's also nice to see your score next to someone else's score and that sort of give and take there, so it makes it a bit more of a race. Plus, they've got some other things going on here that kind of brought into the game. And then this too. As silly as it sounds, I think it's fantastic that they created this little component. It's not the highest quality component in the world, but you put all your broken glass in there instead of laying it in the box or in a pile, and then you just pour it back into the bag when you need to.
They also tried to make the game colorblind. It's not a perfect solution, but on the back side, you're going to see where you can put specific tiles in specific areas. And then each of these tiles, if you look very closely at not only the columns, but the tiles themselves, they do match up with patterns, but they're a little bit hard to see at times. But the back of the tiles are fantastic. Anything else positive? Because I'm going to get into my negatives.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. As I said, this is Azul, and I don't feel like it brought enough newness to it, to the actual Azul gaming line, so to speak. When they talked about the game originally, they said this was going to be a more gamery Azul. I actually think the original Azul is more gamery than this. I think this is actually a step down as far as complexity than the original Azul.
I feel both ways. I feel like the original Azul mechanically is very simple. This is also very simple. This adds a couple layers in terms of moving that glazier. The way you have to move him and the fact that you're able to basically skip a turn from taking a tile and move him back, it doesn't really make it any more complicated, but it does add that little ability. If you're into hate drafting, you're able to delay your taking a tile and maybe force it on someone else. But then, of course, you'll find them doing the same thing right back to you.
Which is one of the great things I loved about Azul was the hate drafting. Like, you could really stick people early game with tiles that they didn't want to have. I feel like that didn't happen enough for us in this game until late game. When you start filling up this board and your columns start being removed, then you start, the fifth and the sixth round, that hate drafting comes more into play. But it never felt like it came into play in the first to the fourth round because you have all kinds of different areas that you can go to. There's a lot of spaces here that you can be able to use to occupy those tiles. And then the whole thing, just kind of like Seven Wonders Duel, where you can skip a turn. You can basically move your glazer all the way back, and then you have all those tiles to refill. So I feel like the hate drafting portion's been taken back a notch just because
pushed
of this.
To the end?
Yeah, just because of the way the board is.
Yeah, definitely. The hate drafting does ramp up towards the end. I do think it's about seizing your opportunities in that respect, because you can look at someone trying to eye some big bonus points depending on what tile is on the round, and depending on what tiles come out here, they may have been sitting on a couple columns of a bunch of yellow that they're going to score during the yellow round, and then if those yellows don't come out and you take the one or two yellows that they wanted, you're really going to make them lose a lot of points. Plus, they've stalled a lot of their game not scoring those already.
Yeah.
So there is some interesting choices, but like we said, I think from an overall standpoint, this doesn't seem significantly more gamery.
No, it doesn't. Anything else you want to say about it?
Yeah, I mean, one last thing I'd say is that the typical question a lot of people have when they look at a sequel to a game or something like that is, does this replace Azul? I think my initial gut is, no, it doesn't replace Azul. It's very similar, so it doesn't feel like significantly different. And that leads to the second question most people have is, can you have, or should I have both in my collection? And they're not, I don't know if it's different enough to answer that question with a resounding yes. Because I do feel both play similarly enough that I don't know, other than the novelty of playing both in one night, that I think I'd want to play this and then for a very different experience play the other one. It almost feels like this could have been a variation, and it is a variation on the direct initial Azul mechanic.
It feels like it could have been an expansion, like some of the stuff could have just been added to the original game. Maybe
it would have been tricky, but yes, it could have been something like that.
Completely agree with that statement. So that is Azul Stained Glass of Sintra. It's a 2 to 4 player abstract game, 30 to 45 minutes. So it's a really, really quick game. If you guys have any questions about it, make them in the comments below. Subscribe to us, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, everything else that we do. We'll catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.